Burkina Faso strikes back. Terror groups crush for years. The people of Burkina Faso have lived under a dark shadow, a constant weight pressing down on their daily lives. Armed groups have moved like ghosts through villages, snatching peace from the hearts of mothers and fathers, disrupting the rhythm of children's laughter, and leaving behind a trail of fear that felt impossible to shake. Every sunrise carried uncertainty. Every nightfall carried whispers of gunfire in the distance. Families would gather inside their homes, clutching each other tightly, praying that this night, just maybe, would be quiet. And then, something shifted. The country had been waiting for a moment of hope, something that could pierce through the heavy clouds of despair, and it came like a thunderclap. The Burkina forces launched a strike that has now become the talk of not only their own towns and cities, but far beyond their borders. It wasn't just a military operation, it was a statement. A powerful roar from a nation that has had enough of living in fear, in a coordinated, relentless offensive. The armed forces of Burkina Faso swept into areas once considered safe havens for terrorist groups. What followed was nothing short of astonishing. The men and women in uniform moved with precision, determination, and an unwavering resolve. Their hearts were on fire with the desire to protect their people. And that fire burned brighter than the darkness that had plagued the land for so long. Images began to emerge, rows upon rows of confiscated weapons lying lifeless on the ground. Symbols of years of terror now stripped of their power. Former strongholds were cleared, once again echoing not with gunfire, but with the hum of relief. Dozens of militants were captured, many of them surrendering, their faces drained of the arrogance they once carried. And behind the soldiers stood the people, cheering, weeping, embracing one another as if waking from a nightmare. There was something raw and emotional in the air, something almost sacred. Because this wasn't just about territory or tactics. This was about the right to live without fear. The right to walk through your village road without looking over your shoulder. The right to send your children to school and know they will come home. The right to dream again. For so long, Burkina Faso has been portrayed as a victim of unending conflict. But what is often missed in those headlines is the resilience of its people. They are not just survivors, they are fighters. They have carried their lives through storms most could not imagine. And somehow, they've kept going, kept loving, kept laughing, kept believing in something better. When the operation ended, when the dust began to settle, there was no loud celebration from the soldiers. Just quiet, tired smiles. They knew the work wasn't done. They knew that what they had achieved was historic, but also fragile. Terrorism doesn't vanish overnight, but for the first time in a long time, there's a sense that maybe it could be defeated. Villagers began to emerge from hiding, their steps cautious at first, like people testing if the ground beneath them was still solid. Slowly, those steps turned into confident strides. In towns once silenced by fear, markets reopened. The smell of grilled meat and fresh bread returned to the air. Radios played music again, the kind of joyful songs that make children dance barefoot in the dust. These may seem like small things to the outside world, but here they are. Everything Traoré, the leader of this effort, has become a symbol of defiance, of courage standing tall in the face of cruelty. People speak of him with a kind of grateful awe, not as some distant figure of authority, but as someone who carried their collective hopes on his shoulders. He stood where others might have run, and when he struck hard. It's hard to capture what it means to an entire country to finally breathe again. To hear silence and not feel fear. To see soldiers and feel safe instead of anxious. To look at your children and dare to think about their futures instead of just their survival. That shifts the emotional. Invisible shifts is what this victory truly represents. There are stories now spreading quietly like warm embers. A mother whose son can finally return to school after 2 years of hiding. A farmer who can walk his fields again without scanning the horizon. A little girl who said she heard music for the first time in her life and danced until she fell asleep. These are the victories that don't get listed in reports or counted in statistics, but they are the ones that matter most. Of course, the people know the path ahead will not be easy. Terror groups don't disappear just because of one defeat. There will be challenges, attempts to return, to strike back. But something fundamental has changed. The people have seen what is possible when they stand together. The fear that once divided them has cracked, and through those cracks, light is pouring in. International observers are watching closely, some with surprise, others with admiration. Many didn't expect a country so often overlooked, so often underestimated, to rise this powerfully. Yet here they are, Burkina Faso, standing tall, showing the world that strength doesn't always roar from the biggest stages. Sometimes it rises quietly from the dust, from the hands of ordinary people who refuse to be broken. Right now, there is still rubble to clear, still wounds to heal, still hearts to mend. But the energy is different. The people speak in louder voices now, walk with straighter backs, and smile with eyes that finally dare to sparkle. In a place where hope was once an endangered thing, it now feels like it's blooming everywhere, wild and unstoppable. Burkina Faso has struck back. And in doing so, they've reminded the world of something deeply human, that even in the darkest times, courage can rise, community can endure. And peace, no matter how distant it may seem, can be reclaimed by those brave enough to fight for it. Burkina Faso's decisive military strike didn't just silence the echo of gunfire, it carried the weight of a nation's exhaustion, its longing for peace, and its fierce determination to rise again. For years, countless families have lived under the shadow of fear. Villages whispered in the dark, wondering if tomorrow would come, if their children could laugh outside without that thin thread of worry tugging at their parents' hearts. And then suddenly, like a storm that clears the air, the country's forces struck back with precision and unshakable will. This wasn't just another military operation. It was the release of years of frustration and loss. Every soldier who marched into the field carried the silent voices of those who could no longer speak, the farmers driven from their land, the teachers who had to abandon their classrooms, the mothers who held their children a little tighter each night. It was personal, and that personal fire became their strength. The operation unfolded with a level of coordination that stunned even seasoned observers. Intelligence teams had worked tirelessly, threading together fragments of information like delicate pieces of a puzzle. Every small tip, every intercepted message, every brave villager who shared what they said, all built toward this moment. When the green light was given, the forces moved as one body, swift and sure. As they advanced, resistance was fierce. But what stood out was the sheer resolve in the soldiers' eyes. They were not just following orders, they were fighting for the right of their people to sleep peacefully again. The crackle of gunfire wasn't just a sound of battle. It was the sound of fear being pushed back, inch by inch. And behind those front lines, support teams kept the heartbeat of the mission steady, medics ready, supply lines flowing, communication crackling with urgency and hope. Villagers watched from the distance, hearts pounding, clutching one another as they heard the fighting rage on. Some prayed, some wept, and some stood frozen, caught between dread and a fragile hope. And then the silence came. That heavy, surreal silence after the chaos breaks. Slowly word spread. The networks had been dismantled, leaders captured, weapons seized, camps destroyed. The dark web of terror that had strangled their lives was unraveling before their eyes. The emotional weight of that victory was indescribable. Soldiers returning from the front were not greeted with cheers of triumph, but with tears. Children ran to them, clinging to their legs. Elders blessed them with trembling hands. It was as if the entire country took one deep collective breath for the first time in years. There was pride, yes, but more than that, there was relief. Quiet, fragile relief that maybe, just maybe, the tide had turned. Inside the command centers, exhaustion mingled with joy. The faces of the commanders, lined with sleepless nights, softened as they received reports confirming the success. They had gambled everything on this operation: resources, manpower, and trust. And it had paid off. Not just in strategic terms, but in human ones. Lives were saved. Roads once haunted by ambushes could now open again. Markets could hum back to life. Schools could ring with laughter instead of echoing emptiness. This victory didn't erase the scars of the past. Everyone knows that. Too many lives have been lost, too many dreams broken. But what it did do was ignite something powerful: hope. That stubborn, glowing ember that refuses to die even in the darkest nights. And hope is contagious. It spread from soldier to villager, from city to countryside. As news of the strike rippled through the nation, radio broadcasts carried the updates. People gathered around crackling speakers, holding their breath as voices announced the success. In some places, church bells rang. In others, drums beat softly, reverently. Not in wild celebration, but in gratitude. Because everyone understood the cost. The young men and women who went into that battle knew they might not come back, and yet they went. That kind of courage leaves a mark. It inspires. It heals. Even the international community paused, watching with a mix of surprise and admiration. Burkina Faso, often seen through the lens of struggle, had shown a fierce kind of strength, an unyielding spirit. And for the people living through it, this was more than a military milestone. It was a moment of reclaiming their dignity, their voice, their future. In homes across the country, parents could finally look their children in the eye and speak of tomorrow without that thin veil of fear. Farmers walked their fields, touching the soil like an old friend returned. Merchants opened their shops with a new spark in their eyes. And though the road ahead will still be hard, the nation has taken a step that once felt impossible. The strike was not just about defeating terror groups on a map. It was about healing wounds that don't show in photographs. It was about reminding every single person in Burkina Faso that they are not powerless, that their spirit cannot be broken, that their land and their lives are worth fighting for. And in that moment, as the dust settled over the dismantled camps and the soldiers laid down their weapons with weary hands, a quiet truth rose in their hearts. They had done something extraordinary. It's hard to describe the kind of quiet pride that has settled across Burkina Faso lately. For years, the people had lived under the heavy shadow of fear, unsure if the roads they traveled were safe, if their children would return home from school, or if the markets that once buzzed with laughter and life would erupt into chaos without warning. But now something has shifted. Something powerful. The recent military operation didn't just push back. Armed groups had reignited a sense of hope that many thought had been lost forever. You can feel it in the way people walk now. Their shoulders no longer hunched under invisible weight. There's a new rhythm to the streets, a quiet confidence returning, like the land itself is breathing a little easier. Neighbors greet each other not with forced smiles, but with genuine warmth. Parents are daring to dream again for their children. It's as if the air is lighter. For so long, the only news people expected was bad news. Every radio bulletin was another village attacked, another road blocked, another family displaced. People had learned to brace themselves for sorrow. But when the announcement came that the operation had succeeded, when word spread that major terror cells had been dismantled, that key strongholds had fallen, there was a pause, a collective stillness. And then, like the first drops of rain hitting parched soil, relief. It wasn't just the victory itself. It was the message behind it. The government and the armed forces had shown that they could stand strong. They could protect their people when it mattered most. That kind of reassurance can move mountains in the human heart. For many, it felt like waking up from a long, relentless nightmare. People started talking about the future again. Not just surviving the next day, but actually planning months ahead, even years. Farmers who had abandoned their fields because of constant attacks are now quietly returning to the land, checking the soil, feeling it crumble between their fingers. Shopkeepers are unlocking their shutters earlier, sweeping the dust from their storefronts with a little more care. Children who used to flinch at the sound of loud voices or distant bangs are chasing each other in the streets again, their laughter piercing through the silence that had hung over villages like a curse. What's striking is how this victory has gone beyond military achievement, emotional. It's personal. It has touched something deep inside people who had grown numb to disappointment. There's a rekindled trust in institutions, in the idea that working together can actually change things. That belief had been battered by years of broken promises and slow responses, but seeing such a coordinated Successful operation has reminded everyone that resilience isn't just a word they are living proof of. Even the soldiers who returned from the front lines were welcomed like heroes. Not just because they fought, but because they symbolize something bigger: unity. Many of them are sons, brothers, neighbors. People lined the roads when they came back, waving flags, clapping, some even crying openly. That kind of public emotion has been rare in recent years, buried under survival mode. But this time, people let themselves feel it. Markets have grown louder again, not with panic, but with bargaining, laughter, music crackling from old radios. Women carry baskets on their heads, humming as they walk, while old men sit beneath neem trees, telling stories of better days. And for the first time in a long time, those stories don't feel like distant fairy tales. They feel like something that might just return. The most beautiful part is how this wave of renewed confidence is weaving communities closer together. Villages that used to live in isolation, too afraid to visit each other, are reconnecting. Local leaders are organizing gatherings, not to mourn the lost, but to discuss rebuilding, to plan festivals, to celebrate what still stands. That sense of togetherness is fragile, but it's glowing, and everyone seems determined to protect it. The operation has done more than push back danger. It has given people back their sense of belonging. That's a powerful thing. When people believe they are safe, they start to invest in each other again. They plant seeds not just in the soil, but in their own hearts. Seeds of hope, of ambition, trust, and perhaps the most telling sign of change is the way people talk about their country now. Instead of sighing or shaking their heads, they speak of Burkina Faso with pride again. They talk about its strength, its resilience, its future. They see it as something worth holding on to, worth defending. That shift, subtle as it is, this might be the greatest victory of all. There's something quietly powerful happening across Burkina Faso right now. After years of tension and fear, people are slowly stepping back into the rhythm of everyday life, and they're doing it with a kind of courage that feels contagious. Streets that once stood empty after dusk are coming alive again. The sound of bicycles rattling down dirt lanes mixes with children's laughter, and even the hum of market chatter seems to carry a deeper warmth. It's not that the hardships have vanished overnight, but the way people are showing up again, for each other and for their communities, says so much about the resilience beating in their hearts. For so long, daily life felt like something fragile, something that could shatter at the slightest noise. Families tiptoed through their routines with their shoulders tense and their eyes scanning the horizon. People learned to move quietly, to keep their heads down, to hope that nothing terrible would happen today. But now, there's a shift. Gentle, but unmistakable. Citizens are reclaiming their routines, their spaces, their sense of normal. It's as if they've all collectively decided to breathe again. Morning scenes tell the story best. Farmers are heading back to their fields, the same ones they once abandoned out of fear. You can see them standing in the early light, scanning the land not for danger, but for signs of life in the soil. There's pride in their movements, in the way they lift their tools, in the way they call out greetings to neighbors passing by. Markets are bustling too, their colors spilling over like they used to. Women are arranging tomatoes and peppers in neat pyramids, laughing as they bargain. Old friends linger to chat under the shade of awnings, catching up on news that isn't soaked in sorrow. What's beautiful is how this return to normal isn't just about tasks or chores, it's about spirit. People are finding their way back to each other. Villages that used to close themselves off are opening their doors again. Weddings that were postponed are finally being celebrated. With drums echoing into the night and bright fabrics swirling in the dance circles, community soccer matches are popping up in dusty fields, where kids run barefoot, kicking up clouds and shouting each other's names with pure joy. These aren't just activities. They are acts of unity has been quietly blooming in these small moments. Different communities, once wary of each other, are finding common ground again. They're sharing stories, pooling resources, rebuilding together. It's not the loud, headline-making kind of unity. It's softer, humbler. It's a woman offering part of her harvest to a struggling neighbor. It's young men repairing a broken well that serves the whole village. its elders sitting under a tree teaching children old songs that were nearly forgotten. These little acts stitch people back together, thread by thread, till the fabric of daily life feels whole again. Even in the towns, you can sense this shift. Taxi drivers chat more easily with their passengers instead of rushing through silent trips. Teachers are seeing their classrooms fill up again, their chalkboards no longer gathering dust. Street vendors are calling out their prices with cheerful persistence, as if every sale is a small victory. It's ordinary, and that's what makes it extraordinary. After everything, people are daring to trust the ordinary again. What stands out most is how personal this renewal feels to everyone. It's not just about rebuilding the economy or reopening roads. It's about reclaiming the simple joys that make life feel worth living: the morning coffee shared with a neighbor, the songs sung while washing clothes by the river, the evening breeze drifting through a family's open door. These are the quiet treasures of daily life, and seeing people embrace them again feels like watching flowers bloom after a long, harsh winter. This return isn't perfect, and people know that. The memory of fear still lingers at the edges, like a shadow at dusk. But that's what makes their determination even more moving. They are choosing